The next question on my list is, Dad, tell me about your parents.
About my parents?
Yeah,
Let's see, I had a dad and I had a mom.
good. We're moving in the right direction.
Dad was born in 1905. Mom was born in 1917.
So there's a 12-year difference.
Maybe, yeah. Well, the way their birthdays are is about 13 years difference.
How did they meet? Did they ever tell you that story?
Well, they moved out to, Dad's folks moved out to the Delta Valley in 1929. And he went out there with them. And he was acquainted with my grandparents long before he was acquainted with my mom.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a little bit scandalous because he was, like I say, lots older than her. She had a job working with a cookware salesman, and they go, they did sales parties in homes. He'd take his cookware into the home and cook a meal, and with the intent to sell the cookware. And she was part of his staff, and when the thing was all over with, then Dad would pick her up and they would go partying, I guess. I don't know what they did. There was some.
So it was a little scandalous, that's true.
Yeah, it was a little scandalous. But they lived essentially across the street from each other. Probably, well, out in Sugarville, across the street was about 100 yards.
That's a long ways across the street.
Well,
Well, out there it is. I don't know, what do you want to know?
Well, so it was scandalous. Was there any fallout from the scandal?
Since Mom had a job, she had her own money. She bought clothes like she wanted, and during high school, she always wore high heels to school. That was, she wanted to look nice, and that was a form of looking nice. She had the money.
So she had this job in school.
Oh yeah, she was only 20 when they were married.
Mm-hmm. Only 20, is that
In
older
fact,
than
just barely 20 when they were married.
you? Okay. So what did your dad... So when they got married, did she just start to stay home, or what?
Yeah. Yeah, she didn't have a job outside the home until after Steve was in school, when she went to work for the Army Depot. Dad was kind of a wild sort of guy.
What do you mean?
Some of the stories right there in front of where he lived, and just to the south of where my grandparents lived, he was headed south down the street there one day, driving like a maniac, which was his reputation, and he made the left turn, didn't quite make it, wiped out all of the mailboxes along there, broke all the windows on the right-hand side of his vehicle, didn't even slow down, just kept on rolling.
Okay.
And, well, he had a reputation for driving fast, and he was going out with a bunch of folks one
I
night,
learned.
and they wouldn't let him drive because he was a wild driver. And they got, as they were going across they're going down to the canal there in Sutherland. I don't remember what circumstance were they met a big truck that was taking up more of the road than was his, and the guy who was driving, to avoid the truck, drove the car into the canal. And Dad was fired up. He had a lot to say about that. And somebody asked him, well, if you'd have been driving, would it have been different? And he says, hell yeah. If I'd have been driving, we'd have met him over by the river instead of out here. Of course, it was another 15 miles from that canal over to the Sevier River just before you got into Delta. But he drank a lot when he was a young man. A lot. In fact, probably alcoholic. But when he decided he would quit, he went for 2 years without going into town at all because he didn't want to meet any of his buddies. If he'd met any of them, they'd have said, well, let's go have a drink, and that would have been an all-nighter. So he would go into town about once a month to get a haircut, go in the back roads, drive up to the back door of the barber shop, go and get his hair cut, go out the back door. And
Why did you decide to quit drinking?
because it wasn't fun. When he made the decision to quit drinking, he was up one morning after a binge, and they had a well out there, and he'd go out and take a drink of the cold water and throw up. He'd drink the cold water and throw up. And of course, he hurt. It hurt a lot, you know, not just throwing up, but headache. And that's when he decided it just wasn't what he wanted to do. You know, and after he and Mom were married, he was working as a farmer, you know, renting property. And this was during the Depression. You know, times were tough. Times were tough. And he supplemented their mealtime an awful lot with poached pheasants and cottontails.
Okay.
His dad had a little herd of sheep. I don't know how many he had, probably a dozen or 15. And Dad would take the sheep down and run them through the sagebrush patch there, and start the sheep through the patch, and then he'd run down at the other end, and the pheasants and the cottontails would run down to out of the patch ahead of the sheep. Well, most of them, they didn't want to run out into the open, so they'd run right up to the edge, and then they'd stop. Well, when they'd stop, he'd shoot them in the head. They shot the pheasants right above the wings, where there was nothing to eat anyway. Shoot his cottontails in the head, and he, you know, he didn't shoot more than he needed. I mean, because that was dinner, that was sustenance.
It was survival.
And at that time, you could buy 22 shorts for 14 cents a box, I think he told me, and you could buy longs for 15 cents and long rifles for 16 cents. And he always bought shorts because he couldn't afford the extra 2 cents for the long rifle. And he felt like that if he didn't get at least 46 or 47 pieces of meat out of a box of shells, he was not productive.
There's 50 in a box.
Yes.
So he allowed himself to miss 3 times.
Yeah. Well, he was a good shooter. When he decided to shoot a deer, the sucker got a hole in it.
Now, is that just he's a good judge of his shooting, or is he really just that good?
It's that good.
Well, and that came down, you know, I think there was some heredity there. Some of the stories he tells about his dad, and his dad didn't shoot very much, but he did a little, and he was telling about a coyote that was in their hen house, and my grandpa had a 25-20, which he kept there, and the coyote was in there. He went out to get the coyote, and when he went out, the coyote ran, and as he jumped over the fence, and it probably wasn't a long shot, I'm going to guess 40, 50 yards, as he went over the fence, Grandpa shot him, nailed him, rolled up in a ball the other side of the fence.
Take it he didn't eat the coyote.
No. No.
Oh, you don't.
He could skin it and sell the pelt.
So one of the questions that was asked to me when I was telling some of that story of your dad shooting all the rabbits is he was wondering, was there a bounty for the ears of the, I guess they were cottontails, maybe
The
not.
cottontails, they were just food. There was no, you know, the pelts were worth a little bit, but not a great deal.
So he didn't save the pellets.
No, they just ate them. And of course, pheasants were illegal. That was poaching.
Yeah, he puts.
Yeah. Well, I would like to say that's the first story of poaching I've heard about from the Depression. But
Well,
I think it was a lot more common than people would ever want to
During the
admit.
Depression, you know,
He was a tough.
life was tough. You know, along about the war, they had lots of. There was a lot of rationing and things like that. And as the war finished up, they were trying to encourage farmers to supplement what the nation needed. And so there was some subsidies and some rules, and he decided that he was going to raise pigs one summer. That was going to be his cash crop,
Okay.
so to speak. And the USDA guy that was out there kind of told him that he couldn't raise pigs. That wasn't a profitable thing right at the time, and that wasn't what the market needed. He went and bought the pigs anyway. And I don't remember how many he said he bought, probably a dozen or so wieners.
Mm-hmm.
Gave a little or nothing for them. You could buy wieners at that time for about a penny a pound,
Mm-hmm.
and they weigh 20 pounds, 30 pounds. And they feed them up till, by fall they'd be 150, 200 pounds, and then they could sell them for, maybe 12 or 15 cents a pound.
Okay.
But he had feed invested in them. But what he told me is he did really well on it, but because he'd been told that he couldn't do that, there was no subsidy. But he still made a good profit. He was happy with it.
Heck with that government guy.
Yeah, well, he didn't need subsidy. He needed the profit off the pigs. So, well, Dad was kind of a contrarian.
He's a curmudgeon, that's what he wanted.
Yeah, but he believed that he was as good as he thought he was. And, things happened. He was, before the Depression, it was earlier in his life, he'd gone to Idaho, southeast Idaho, up there herding sheep. And they had a mule there that nobody could catch. They'd go out and try to rope the mule, and the mule would just watch the rope, and when they throw the lasso, the lariat, he'd dodge. And he was telling them, I can catch the mule. And of course, everybody was telling him, BS, you can't do that. And finally, he got him to bet him a quart of whiskey. That quart of whiskey that he could catch the mule. So he was riding a big black horse that was very strong and fast. And so he got out his lariat. Instead of trying to rope the mule, he just started whipping his ass with the rope, making the mule run as fast as he could. When the mule was running so fast he couldn't dodge, what he had to do to make the bet is he had to rope the mule and then ride it back to the corral.
Quart of whiskey.
For a quart of whiskey. We roped the mule, had the rope around his neck, tied the rope to the saddle horn on his horse, got on the mule with the reins in his hand, rode the mule back, followed the horse back to the...
Got a quart of whiskey.
Well,
Probably didn't remember the rest of the night.
This was during Prohibition, too. So it was probably moonshine.
So he doesn't remember that night at all then. Only they didn't have it the next morning. The quart of whiskey was empty.
I'm sure the whiskey didn't last all night. But when he was running a sheep camp, he was telling me they never drank water. They had a keg of whiskey standing on the shady corner of their sheep camp, and the only time they drank water was in their coffee. They'd want to drink it. They didn't get drunk. They just, when they wanted to drink, they'd have a drink of whiskey. And, the little keg probably held a couple of gallons that would last them a month. 2 or 3 gallons. When he's out sheep camping, but, sheep herder's life is pretty lonely. Yeah. You don't party a lot out there. You just follow the sheep. And he hated sheep, but they paid him.
I'm starting to see a trend in my grandfather's life here.
Well, he did the same thing when he just wanted to be a farmer. That's all he ever wanted to do, was be a farmer.
Just grow crops, sell crops.
And it was awfully tough to make a living as a farmer. He was living in Sanpete County, renting property, renting a house. And in 1949, 1948, 47, 48, I don't remember, that he went up to Tooele, got a job at the Tooele Army Depot for $1 an hour. And he lamented that his whole life. He hated it. But he did it because he needed the money.
He had a family.
Had a family, yeah. So, you know, one of the fellows that talked at his funeral made a comment that Henry Terry was a family man, and that was very complimentary. You know, as I was growing up, Dad was very involved in what we did. A lot of sports, mostly. We played baseball, a lot of baseball. He played baseball with us in the backyard every night of the week almost during the summertime. Went to all our games. He didn't have anything to do with the organization. He didn't have anything to do with coaching. He just was there as a spectator to watch his kids play ball, and we played in the backyard. We played a lot in the backyard.
A lot of catch, huh?
And, well, he lost two front teeth one time because we were playing ball, and the ball hit the ground right in front of him as he bent down to catch it, went over his glove, hit him in the mouth, and knocked his two front teeth out. He didn't ever bother to go to the dentist and get it taken care of.
So, he worked all his life as a, what did he do at the Army Depot?
He was a mechanic.
He's a mechanic.
He was a good mechanic, really good mechanic.
Could fix anything.
He didn't ever take his cars to the garage. It didn't matter what they needed. He fixed it.
That's the farmer thing, isn't it? You just fix it.
He was a good mechanic. He knew how to do it, and he taught most of his sons to be mechanically minded. And when the twins, about the time the twins were born, Mom went into the hospital for gallbladder operation just before they were born, summer before they were born, and they didn't have any insurance, so they ended up with a huge medical bill. So he took a part-time job working at a garage there in town, just to pay off the medical bills.
So he'd work all day at the depot and then go to the garage, work all night, and come home. And
Garage and work all night. And of course he was well acquainted with the guy that owned the garage, and they had a good rapport, good understanding, and there was something that came up one time, and he had a little disagreement with the owner of the garage. And it wasn't like it was an argument or anything, just a little disagreement. And the guy that owned the garage, his wife was there, and she got upset. He got upset, you know. Who's the mechanic and who's the helper? And the guy that owned the place sent her away. No, this is not your place. Leave.
he knew the mechanic who the mechanic was.
And well, he was a good mechanic too. But you know, he'd been doing it for a long time, and he owned the garage there. And that, you know, it was a tough deal. It was tough making a living those days, you know. In fact, he told me one time that I worked for him for quite a while I was in high school.
At the depot?
No.
At the garage.
Okay.
For the garage.
Well, the biggest, Robert worked there, and Ted worked there, and I worked there, and I think the biggest reason that we got those jobs is because
How's it on?
Like hands on.
we turned it over.